Silent partner theory, a Cartesian front study. What is the silent partner theory? I am sure you have never heard of it. In 2011, I had a vision of how diagnostics will happen or should happen in the age of information. This was the dog video. The purpose was to provide relatively accurate diagnostics in virtually no time. Let's think about it. So if a kid is coughing and has fever, is he infected with influenza, or is he infected with some bacteria, or is he infected with RSV, which is a respiratory syncytial virus, which is making a huge comeback? Or is it potentially something really dangerous like SARS, which was the virus from 2003? So we want to determine exactly what was the causing agent. How is this done today? Before my concept came to life, before we had molecular methods, doctors would look at the child's symptoms. As the science of diagnostics advances, testing for the specific pathogen using molecular methods like PCR, viral panels, or antigen detection has become commonplace in hospitals and is routinely used. So PCR are great because they give specific answers. You can test for, let's say, you test for 4 viruses. This is extremely unrealistic. This is HIV, adenovirus, hepatitis B, and influenza. And it comes up, you wouldn't test for these. And it comes up negative for 3 of them and positive for influenza. And this was the sick child from before, so we determined that symptoms, his or her symptoms, were caused by influenza. Co-infection is also a thing, and it is possible for a sick child to have more, or sick adult, to be infected with more than one virus. For example, this person could be positive for adenovirus and influenza. So co-infection is a thing. Now this is somewhat confusing, or could be somewhat confusing, because the doctor may not be sure whether the symptoms were caused by adenovirus or influenza, or a combination of both. All possibilities are possible. Normally, it doesn't make a huge difference, but it is an interesting theoretical question: what caused the symptoms? So even with accurate diagnostics, we cannot be certain what caused the symptoms. Now another limitation of, which is probably a limitation which would become smaller and smaller with time, we don't, normally hospitals don't test for everything. One reason is that some things are just irrelevant, like phages infect bacteria, and they would not normally be relevant to a child with pneumonia. And they also don't test for exotic viruses like Ebola, because it is very rare in most countries, and unless there is an Ebola outbreak near that sick individual, then there's really no point of testing. So we test for the usual suspects. We leave these guys on the side. Now, this is the normal situation, but this video is not about the normal situation, it's about the silent partner, which is an extremely rare thing, or should be an extremely rare thing. Because sometimes it is Ebola. So a kid comes to the hospital, he seems to be very sick. He has very high fever and he's coughing a lot. And you test him and he's influenza positive. Say this is a kid, a Parisian kid. He's in Paris. So there's no Ebola in Paris. But somehow he got it. I mean, there was a bat. The bat somehow was exported to who knows. So they find that the kid is influenza positive, but he's feeling really sick. So they have to put him in the hospital. In the case of Ebola, the kid should be in total or maximal isolation. So, because Ebola is super infectious and super lethal. However, they don't suspect Ebola. And despite the condition of the kid, they find influenza, so they think it's influenza, nothing to worry about. But then a few of the nurses taking care of him become really sick, and he's beginning to die. And they say, well, maybe it could be Ebola. They test, and it's Ebola. Immediately the hospital shuts down, right? Everything changes. So it can happen. It's very rare, but it can happen. What happens when it happens? A good example is the SARS outbreak from 2003, which was caused by SARS-CoV-1, the eponym, I think, of the current events. So there was a SARS outbreak. It began in China in 2002. It reached Canada through carriers. There was one outbreak somewhere in Canada around March, and another one around April. This is actually, so this would be the April one. So this old guy comes to the hospital. Apparently, according to the story, he has SARS, but he also has a broken pelvis. No offense. He's really old. He's 96 years old. And he gets to the hospital, and he's treated, and then he develops symptoms of pneumonia, and they believe it's Clostridium difficile, which is pretty common in hospitals and can cause pneumonia. They give him antibiotics. Initially it's okay, but then he's not responding to the antibiotics. They move him, and during this month he infected a bunch of people, and a bunch of them died. Same thing with a kid whose grandmother returned from Hong Kong. She had SARS, she died. He went to the hospital, he was hospitalized, then everyone around him became sick, and really sick, and a lot died. So it was basically like a handful, not a handful, of seeds, and these were causing these outbreaks. So SARS-CoV-1 was not officially identified until late April, May of 2003. And by then they contained this outbreak. So they used symptoms-based approach to contain the outbreak. They said if you have these symptoms and you were in contact, then this whole area is blocked. So the hospital is blocked, right? Or the ward first is blocked, then the hospital is blocked. So they stopped SARS before they knew it was SARS. I'm going to call this kind of a virus a silent partner. So back in 2003, SARS died as a silent partner. In the initial cases, there was an explanation. But even after they knew there was an outbreak of something mysterious, they didn't know what it is. So they still treated patients and allocated resources based on symptoms alone, and not on molecular tests, because they were unable to test specifically for SARS. So SARS died as a silent partner. It's quite obvious that as we move forward, we would be able to diagnose diseases better. But you can identify viruses way faster than you could back in 2003. If you know that a bunch of people has something nasty, then you can identify it quite rapidly. Or you have a much better chance today than you had back then. So can we still have this kind of a weird silent partner thing in July 2021? Let's define a silent partner first. A silent partner is it doesn't have to be SARS, and it doesn't have to be Ebola. It could be a lot less aggressive than that, but it has to be unusually aggressive. So it doesn't have to be a 10, but it has to be above 5 in terms of pathogenicity. It also has to be unidentified. To truly be a silent partner, there also has to be an alternative explanation which is incorrect. Let's see how it works. The conditions are: there's a new and or unidentified pathogen, viral pathogen, which I call VX. Okay, it's an unknown virus, VX. This virus, this VX, causes severe disease. There's also a known pathogen, which we call V. So this is V. This is the normal virus which we expect. It causes a similar disease to VX, superficially similar. Let's say that VX causes pneumonia, which has a fatality rate of 20%. Then V also causes pneumonia, but far less severe pneumonia, and it has a fatality rate of 0.1%. However, V spreads faster than Vx, and in order for the theory to manifest itself, for there to be an effect, which I call the silent partner effect, V and Vx have to overlap in time to some degree. Another condition, which would be hard to understand initially, but if you're a doctor, maybe you could. So when you get to the hospital, the doctors decide what to do with you, where to put you. So if, for example, during SARS, doctors suspect you have SARS, they put you in a very special place. They try to isolate you as much as possible. The management of these patients is based on two things: molecular identification of V, because the hospital believes that V is the thing that we need to prevent. So there's a V which is spreading and it causes pneumonia, and when someone gets to the hospital and they see that he has V, they send him to a special place, special ward, V ward. Now, when you have very severe cases of pneumonia, you immediately assume that it's V. And even before their tests come back, or even if the tests are negative initially, at the initial wave of V, you put them in the V ward, just to be safe. It makes sense, right? You don't want to expose the whole hospital. You see that they're very sick, and you know that, and you think that V makes people very sick, so you put them together. Severe cases and V positive cases, molecularly V positive cases, go to a special ward which is called the V ward. What happens in the hospital?